The market ring of Station Varel was alive with noise and color that day, filled with traders from 100 worlds selling fruit that glowed and metals that sang when touched. Among them moved Queen Soraka of the Kreeth, tall and gleaming. In crimson armor, her scales shifting faint light like living metal, her visit was meant to show strength and calm after months of border raids. She brought her 2 young daughters, small and bright-eyed hatchlings named Sari and Lurith, each carrying a carved stone of lineage. They trailed her guards with curiosity that no lesson of discipline could contain. The queen tolerated their questions because it was their first view beyond Kreeth Prime, and she wanted them to see what peace looked like. Jonah Reed worked nearby as a human engineer on the station's lower decks. He fixed coolant leaks and kept power lines alive when automated systems failed. To him, the royal visit meant longer shifts and random security checks, but he did not complain. Humans were new to the council and still seen as unreliable. Jonah preferred his tools to politics. He moved through the maintenance corridors under the market, hearing the hum of the station like a heartbeat through metal walls. Above him, voices in many tongues echoed, and then came a sound that was not usual. The shriek of alarm in Kreeth pitch. When the alarm spread, Soraka turned and saw empty air where her daughters had been. Her guards formed a ring, but there were no tracks on the polished floor. Panic rippled through the market. Vendors sealed booths and shoppers fled. The queen's voice thundered across comm lines promising death to anyone who hid her children. Station control locked every airlock and summoned drones, humans among. The crowd felt eyes on them because when fear rises, blame falls on strangers. Jonah was under the north vent shaft when he saw movement. 2 small shapes crawled from a service grate covered in grime and coolant vapor, their scales dulled by dust, their claws trembling. He recognized the royal markings from every broadcast that day. They were lost, frightened, and their breathing came too fast for the air density there. He hesitated only a second before dropping his tools. He pulled his thermal vest off and wrapped it around them. They hissed weakly but did not bite. He checked the vent for fumes and realized the coolant was leaking more gas than safe levels. He picked both up gently, one under each arm, and headed for clean air. The corridors shook with moving security squads, but Jonah avoided them. He knew the routes better than most guards and feared that frightened soldiers might shoot before they saw what he carried. He took them into an old bay where a generator's hum kept the air warm. The hatchlings burrowed against his chest, drawn to the steady rhythm of his heart. He laid down so their breathing could match his own. He sang a low tune his grandmother used to hum when storms rattled the old ships on Earth. The 2 small creatures stilled, and within minutes they slept curled tight against him. Hours passed before the search drones found them. The light from the drones woke Jonah first. He raised a hand and asked softly for quiet because they were sleeping. The guards froze when they saw the young heirs lying safe on a human's chest. None dared move. One called the queen, who arrived moments later, armored, furious, her voice like thunder in metal halls. She stepped through the guard's ring and saw the sight herself. For a long moment even she could not speak. Jonah tried to rise, but one hatchling chirped and pressed closer as if sensing threat. The queen's claws flexed. Her instinct screamed to strike. Yet her daughters were calm, their tails wrapped around the human's arm. No Kreeth hatchling had ever done such a thing. She ordered the guards to stand down and motioned for a medic. Her eyes never left Jonah's face as he explained what happened, how he found them near a coolant vent, how he used his body heat to steady their breathing. He spoke simply and without fear. She listened but said nothing until the medic confirmed no harm had come to them. Soraka leaned closer, her voice low but hard. "You understand what it means that my blood sleeps on your heart," she said. Jonah nodded once. "I understand they were cold and needed warmth," he replied. The queen studied him with the gaze of a predator and then looked at her daughters, now softly purring against the human's chest. She sheathed her blades and told her guard to leave them be until the hatchlings woke. It was the first time in memory a Kreeth queen had lowered her weapons before an alien outside. The station buzzed with confusion and rumor. Some said the human cast a spell. Others whispered that the young had imprinted on him. The council broadcast official relief, but beneath it tension thickened. Jonah was taken for questioning when the hatchlings finally stirred and clung to him again, refusing to go to anyone else. The queen ordered that he be treated gently until truth was known. In her private chamber, she replayed the footage again and again, trying to understand how her daughters could trust a creature from a death world they barely knew. As the day ended, Jonah sat in a holding room with soft lights. The two little princesses slept again beside him, and a guard watched in silence. Across the wall, a monitor showed the queen pacing alone. Between them stretched the thin thread of something no one in the galaxy had words for yet. A connection, born not of politics or power, but of one heartbeat, steady and kind, in a place filled with fear. It was the beginning of something that would change the course of both their species, though neither knew it yet. Queen Soraka stood before the sealed observation pane and watched her daughters through the glass as they slept in a nest of warmed fabric beside the human who had saved them. The chamber had been cleared of guards because the young hissed at anyone who entered except the human. This single man, named Jonah Reed, now sat quietly with his back to the wall, while two royal hatchlings rested against his chest, their claws clutching the cloth of his shirt. The queen's mind warred with itself between pride and rage, between gratitude and the instinct to strike. Her advisors urged her to separate them by force, yet she had seen the terror in her daughter's eyes the first time guards tried to pull them away, and she would not see them in pain again. She ordered the room sealed and entered alone. Jonah looked up as the door hissed open. He did not stand, fearing sudden movement might wake the little ones. He spoke in a calm voice, saying they were resting better now. Their breathing had steadied, and they had eaten the broth brought by the medic. Soraka studied him closely, taking in the grease stains on his uniform, the calloused hands and the steady eyes that did not waver before a queen. She asked him why he had not surrendered the children to the first guard he saw. Jonah explained that when he found them, the coolant gas was thick and soldiers were firing at shadows, thinking saboteurs were near. He thought if he ran out with the princesses, someone might panic and shoot, so he found a safe bay and waited until the alarm cleared. His voice held no fear, only a tired kind of honesty that made her pause. She asked him what made him think his warmth could help her young. He shrugged slightly and said that human infants calmed to rhythm and heat, and he hoped the same would help them, that all living things recognize a steady heartbeat. The queen's crest flattened in thought. Among the Creeth, nurturing was done by attendants with thermal pods and chemical sense, not by direct touch, yet her daughters still slept in peace under the human's arm. For the first time, she considered that perhaps humans understood something about care that warriors forgot. She told him the hatchlings' names and thanked him with a stiff nod that made the room feel lighter. Outside, the station council demanded answers. The disappearance had embarrassed both the Creeth and the neutral port authorities. Rumors said human smugglers were involved. Security footage showed gaps where cameras went dark for exactly 11 minutes. Jonah's presence near those systems drew suspicion. The station commander, a nervous Andari with translucent skin, wanted the human held for questioning. Soraka refused, stating that no harm would come to the one who saved her blood until truth was proven. Her words carried the weight of a vow and silenced the chamber. Jonah spent the next hours helping station engineers repair the coolant leak, while the hatchlings stayed under watch. When Soraka saw the repairs, she was surprised that his tools were simple and manual. She asked why he did not use drones like the others. Jonah smiled slightly and said, "Drones failed when power cycled, but hands still worked." The simplicity of his logic unsettled her because it was true. She began to sense that humans approached problems differently, using patience and instinct more than machines. Her guard captain, a scarred veteran named Velk, distrusted him openly. He warned the queen that humans were unpredictable and could not be bound by oaths. She replied that unpredictability had saved her daughters when discipline failed. Later, that day, the station's investigators found fragments of code buried deep in the maintenance network. It was a stealth worm that caused the camera failures. The pattern was not human design. It carried Creeth encryption from an old war campaign. Someone within her own empire had staged the chaos. Soraka's tail lashed as she realized betrayal had come from inside her ranks. Jonah asked to see the data logs and noticed the signal route matched a ventilation line near the market. He told her that a coolant leak, like the one he found, was no accident. It was likely a distraction to herd the children away from guards. His calm explanation made her breathe slow again. She saw the truth in his reasoning and ordered her people to trace the signal. The trail led toward the cargo bays. When they reached the cargo section, the sensors went blind again. Jonah knelt and tapped the metal floor, listening for vibration. He said a charge was humming below the deck. The guards froze, unsure what to do. He asked for a screwdriver and began loosening panels while instructing them to stand back. The Queen watched in silence as he worked with focus, steady as stone. Within minutes, he pulled free a canister armed with a timer. The guards reacted too fast and one brushed a wire that sent sparks across the floor. Jonah pressed the timer core with his thumb, holding pressure as sweat beaded on his forehead. He told the Queen quietly that he needed a cold patch to freeze the trigger. She handed him her own blade, chilled by combat suit coolant, and he used it to clamp the mechanism until it stopped ticking. The tension in the room broke as the device powered down. The Queen's eyes met his, and she saw not arrogance but steady courage. She gave him a warrior's salute, palm across heart. For a Creeth queen to salute a human was unheard of, and every guard present would remember it until death. She declared that any who harmed the human would answer to her. Together they examined the device and found the seal of a rival lord burned onto the frame. It was clear now that this had been an attempt to disgrace her and destroy her alliance with other species by blaming humans for treachery. That night, as the station quieted, Saraka sat beside her sleeping daughters again. They still curled close to Jonah's side as if drawn by an invisible bond. The Queen reached out and rested a claw on her youngest's crest, feeling the steady rhythm of the human heartbeat through the floor. It reminded her of the great drums that guided her people's battles, but gentler and filled with life instead of death. She whispered that maybe the old stories were wrong about humans being reckless beasts. Maybe their strength was not in claws or fire, but in hearts that could calm fear itself. She did not yet know that her thought would become prophecy whispered across the stars in years to come, but for that moment it was enough to know her daughters were safe and that a human's warmth had saved the future of her line. The next morning, the station lights dimmed to maintenance glow as investigators worked through the night, tracing the worm signal that had caused the chaos. Queen Saraka had not slept. She sat in the command hall surrounded by flickering hollow maps showing data trails running across the market and into the cargo decks where Jonah had disarmed the bomb. Every line of light on the map reminded her of treachery, and the faces of her daughters flashed in her mind whenever she blinked. Her guards stood silent, unsure whether to speak. Jonah arrived with a repair kit still smudged with grease and offered to help trace the remaining signals by hand, since the automatic system was still corrupted. The council technicians were insulted at first, but the Queen raised her hand, giving him permission. He laid out old-style paper sheets and began sketching airflow and signal paths using colored pencils he carried for marking cables. The aliens watched in disbelief as he used smell and sound to guess where the vents carried the coded pulses. His logic was strange, yet every estimate matched the data once recalculated. Saraka watched him work with focused patience. She realized that his calm nature steadied her court in a way none of her warriors could. The hatchlings played quietly, nearby watched by medics, and whenever Jonah passed near, they chirped happily. Her heart softened each time, but her warrior mind stayed alert, because she knew this calm would not last. The rival who had planted the bomb would not sit idle after failing once. At midday, the sensors along the lower ring detected faint distortions. Jonah frowned and said it looked like a network echo, not random interference, which meant someone was moving hidden through maintenance shafts. The Queen's tail coiled in anger. She ordered her guard captain Velk to lead a sweep, but Jonah stopped, him saying that the enemy expected soldiers and that loud boots would scare them away. Instead, he proposed to track the echo by tapping the pipes and listening to how the vibration changed. The Queen gave a rare smile of respect and told Velk to follow the human's lead. They moved through the dim service corridors where dust hung in the air like fog. Jonah moved with quiet steps, using his wrench to tap metal. Each tap came back with a different hum, and after a dozen turns, he said they were close because the echo sounded hollow, as if someone had cut open a vent. The guards tightened their grip on weapons. A faint beeping came from ahead, and Jonah raised a hand to halt them. They crept closer and saw a small control node with blinking lights hidden behind a crate. Inside was a relay connected to the worm signal, feeding data out of the station through compressed bursts. The Queen hissed in rage. recognizing the encryption pattern as military code belonging to Lord Zareth, her old rival who had opposed human trade alliances. Jonah disconnected the power link, but instead of dying, the relay triggered a countdown to explosion. Without hesitation, he yanked free the battery and crushed it under his boot before the capacitor could fire. The smell of burning metal filled the air, and everyone exhaled in disbelief. The Queen looked at him with eyes wide because few even among her own kind would have acted so fast under pressure. They brought the ruined relay to the council chamber, where technicians confirmed the code origin. Zareth had indeed tried to frame the humans by using Kreeth encryption, combined with human tool signatures stolen from trade databases. The plan was meant to ignite war between species. Soraka's claws dug into the metal table as she realized how close they had come to open conflict. She turned to Jonah and asked him what he thought should be done. He said that if they attacked Zareth now, it would prove the rival's claim that she let humans influence her. Instead, they should gather proof and let truth expose the traitor. His advice was simple but carried weight. She agreed and gave him access to restricted archives so he could help decode the remaining signals. Velk protested, saying it was blasphemy to share royal data with an outsider, yet the Queen silenced him, reminding the court that this outsider had already risked his life twice for the crown as they worked. The hatchlings watched from their corner, repeating the rhythm of Jonah's tapping on pipes. The Queen noticed this and realized her daughters were learning from him without fear. It made her proud and uneasy at once. She approached him later, asking why he risked himself for people who barely trusted him. He told her that where he came from, a life saved was a debt of the heart, not of politics, and that he could not watch children suffer when he had hands that could help. She said Kreeth warriors pay blood for debt, and he answered that blood and sweat meant the same thing when used for the right reason. His words stayed in her mind longer than she expected. That evening, they discovered the last piece of the worm's path leading to the cargo bay where shipments left for the outer colonies. Soraka ordered all traffic frozen and went there herself with Jonah and Velk. The air smelled of ozone and burnt plastic. They found a docking module half detached from the main ring, its engines cold, but loaded with volatile fuel cells. Inside, the base had a stack of crates filled with illegal weapons bearing the rival lord's mark. Before they could finish scanning, a tremor shook the deck. A swarm of small drones powered up and fired stun bolts, forcing them to dive for cover. Jonah grabbed a fallen energy shield and dragged it across to protect the Queen. Velk shouted commands while cutting drones apart with his plasma blade. Sparks rained down like blue rain. Jonah crawled to a terminal and ripped out control wires, causing the drones to lose coordination and crash one by one. When the noise stopped, the Queen rose slowly, looking at the human covered in dust and smoke, but still alive. They seized the cargo and pulled data from the control cores, revealing Zareth's plot in full detail. He had intended to ignite an explosion at the docking bay and make it appear that humans were smuggling weapons to assassinate the Queen. Soraka recorded a message to the council demanding his trial and attached the proof. Before sending it, she turned to Jonah and said that his steady mind had saved not just her children, but the fragile peace between species. He bowed slightly and said he was only doing his job as an engineer to fix what was broken. She replied that sometimes what is broken is not metal, but trust itself. For the first time, she allowed herself a small laugh when he answered that both could be repaired with patience and a bit of warmth. As night fell again over the station, the hatchlings curled once more on Jonah's chest, while the Queen stood watching from the doorway. She no longer saw him as a stranger, but as a piece of fate placed in her path. Beyond the walls of the station, Lord Zareth's fleet prepared for retreat, knowing his secret had been uncovered, but planning one last strike before capture. None on the station knew of this yet. For now, the hum of engines and the slow heartbeat under sleeping hatchlings filled the chamber with peace that would soon be tested harder than ever before. The following dawn came with heavy silence across Station Varel, because the news of Lord Zareth's betrayal had spread beyond control. Every channel carried whispers that the Queen's rival was preparing to flee to the outer moons with stolen weapons and loyal soldiers. The Galactic Council wanted Soraka to stay neutral and let their tribunal handle it, but she knew delay would give the traitor time to strike again. Her pride burned, but her instinct told her that the next move could destroy everything she had rebuilt. She stood before the viewing window, watching the stars drift like embers in dark water. her daughters asleep beside Jonah on the soft blankets that the human had laid. The sight softened her fury just enough to think clearly. Jonah entered the command hall at her call, wearing his work uniform patched and stained, but his eyes sharp and steady. She told him that she planned to intercept Zareth before he reached the outer moons, because if he vanished, the evidence would vanish with him. He studied the star maps and pointed out that Zareth's escape route crossed a dust field full of magnetic debris. Large ships would struggle there, but smaller crafts could pass unseen. The Queen frowned, wondering how a human engineer knew this. He smiled slightly and said he had been mapping the field during his maintenance shifts, that he noticed a pattern in the dust currents which formed a safe tunnel invisible to sensors. If they used that tunnel, they could surprise Zareth's convoy before it reached deep space. Soraka considered his plan, then ordered her flagship Bloodlight prepared for immediate launch. Velk protested again, saying it was madness to take a civilian along, but the Queen silenced him with a glare and declared that Jonah was no longer civilian, but honored advisor of the crown. The announcement shocked everyone present, but none dared argue. Within an hour, the Bloodlight lifted from the station's dock, its engines glowing crimson as it joined 2 escort frigates and vanished into the dark inside the ship. The air was thick with tension. Jonah worked alongside Kreeth technicians, helping adjust sensor frequencies to match the dust field's strange pulses. Many of the crew still eyed him with suspicion, yet his calm voice and skill with tools soon earned silent respect. The Queen spent most of the journey on the bridge watching him work. She had never seen someone so at ease inside chaos. He explained how humans learned to adapt to uncertainty, because their homeworld was unpredictable with storms, earthquakes, and endless dangers. Soraka thought of her own world, where every rule was carved in stone, and wondered if rigidity had blinded her people. She said perhaps chaos makes strength. He nodded, saying that survival often grows from mistakes, not perfection. When they reached the edge of the dust field, static filled the sensors. The view outside turned hazy, as if they sailed through liquid metal. Jonah directed the crew to cut main power and switch to passive drift, to avoid detection. The Kreeth warriors murmured uneasily because fighting in silence was against their nature. Yet the Queen trusted the humans' strange logic. The Bloodlight glided through the tunnel Jonah had predicted. It was narrow and dangerous, but it worked. Faint flashes ahead revealed engine bursts from smaller ships. Zareth's convoy was close. The Queen ordered attack formation, but Jonah advised patience. He said that if they fired now, Zareth's fleet would scatter and half would escape. Instead, he proposed to let them enter the densest region of dust where magnetic storms would block their jump drives, then strike from below where sensors were weakest. Soraka nodded, granting him tactical control, another first in Kreeth history. The human gave short, precise orders, his voice calm as if guiding a maintenance drill rather than leading warships into ambush. When the signal came, the Bloodlight rose from the storm like a beast from fog. Plasma beams slashed through the convoy before they could react. Kreeth fighters screamed across the dust field, shredding escort drones. Jonah monitored reactor balance, calling out weak spots. Within minutes, half the enemy ships were disabled, and the rest tried to flee. Zareth's flagship emerged from behind a shattered freighter, firing broadside cannons. The blast shook the Bloodlight and sent sparks across the bridge. Jonah grabbed a falling console piece before it struck a crewman. The Queen steadied herself and barked for counterfire, but their targeting array was damaged. Jonah ran to the auxiliary deck where wires hung loose and coolant leaked. He jammed his hand into the panel, twisting connectors until the screen flickered back online. The Queen fired again and the blast struck Zareth's shields, tearing them apart. Through the viewport, they saw his ship spin and trail smoke before vanishing behind a drifting asteroid. The battle was not over yet. Zareth triggered remote charges hidden among his own cargo vessels. Explosions rippled through the dust, turning it into a sea of fire. The Bloodlight reeled from shockwaves. Jonah shouted for energy redistribution and took manual control of stabilization thrusters. His hands moved faster than the crew could track. The Queen gripped her command chair, watching the human's stubborn determination. When the fires cleared, Zareth's ship was crippled and adrift. She ordered boarding teams ready, but Jonah warned her to wait because the traitor might have planted self-destruct traps. She nodded and sent drones first. They confirmed his fear. The entire hull was rigged to blow. The Queen ordered the ship to be towed into the storm to burn unseen. With the enemy gone, the dust field grew calm again. The Bloodlight limped back toward the station, carrying prisoners and captured data cores. Soraka looked over the report showing how the ambush succeeded because of Jonah's advice. For the first time, she felt pride mixed with humility. She turned to him and said that his strange human instincts had saved her empire from civil war. He answered that he only followed the rhythm of the universe, that every system from engines to hearts works better when you listen instead of forcing it. His words stayed in her mind like a quiet song. When they returned to the station, the council demanded an explanation for the unauthorized mission, but the evidence they brought silenced every critic. Zareth's crimes were displayed across the holoscreens, and his remaining allies fled or surrendered. Peace returned for the moment. That night, Soraka held a small ceremony aboard the Bloodlight, where she presented Jonah with a crest shaped like two joined heartbeats, the symbol of shared life. She told him that from that day he was part of the Royal Guard by bond, not by blood. He accepted quietly, saying that he never wanted titles, only to make sure the hatchlings stayed safe. She smiled, saying then his wish was already granted. Later, when the lights dimmed and the ship rested in dock, the Queen visited the hatchlings' quarters. She found her daughters asleep again, curled beside Jonah on a couch in the warmth of recycled air. She stood there watching them for a long time, feeling the weight of war slowly lifting from her chest. In that simple scene, she saw the meaning of victory, not in conquered enemies, but in trust built between species that had once feared each other. Outside the viewport, stars drifted gently, and for the first time in many cycles, Queen Soraka felt that perhaps the galaxy still had room for peace. Weeks passed since the Dustfield battle, and the station began to hum again with the sound of trade and new life, as if the air itself wanted to forget the violence that had filled its corridors. Yet Queen Soraka could not forget, because the council whispered behind closed doors that she had risked the throne by trusting a human more than her own kind. She heard the soft venom in their words, but she stayed silent, knowing the truth spoke louder than politics. Jonah continued his work on the lower decks, keeping the reactors stable, while her daughters followed him like shadows. They had grown stronger since the ordeal, and their scales shone with new color, a sign of healthy lineage. Wherever they went, guards followed, but the young ignored them and clung to the human who had become their protector. One morning the alarm bells rang again, but this time the threat was not sabotage. It was a broadcast from the Outer Rim announcing that remnants of Lord Zareth's followers had gathered under a new banner and swore revenge against the Queen. They had stolen old warships and were moving toward Station Varel. The council panicked, demanding immediate evacuation, but Soraka refused to flee. She ordered every ship in orbit to prepare for defense. Jonah offered his help, though he was no soldier. She asked him what an engineer could do against a fleet, and he answered that he could keep her ships alive when others would fall. His quiet certainty reminded her of that day in the coolant bay, and she allowed him to work as the fleet approached. The Queen ordered the Bloodlight refitted. Jonah spent sleepless nights in the engine room, patching circuits with bare hands and teaching Kreeth technicians new ways to stabilize power surges. He introduced human design patterns that confused them, but worked flawlessly. When asked how he learned such tricks, he said that on Earth machines were like living creatures that needed understanding, not commands. The Queen listened from the doorway and felt something shift inside her. She realized that the human view of the world was not chaos but harmony, built on trust between mind and machine. It was the same trust she now felt with her people, though they had once feared her wrath. The enemy arrived 3 days later. The sky outside the station filled with fire trails as ships broke from hyperspace. The Queen gathered her captains in the command hall and looked across faces filled with fear and pride. She spoke not as ruler, but as warrior, saying that this battle would decide whether the galaxy saw Kreeth as predators or protectors. She reminded them that survival was not strength alone, but courage to stand beside those once called strangers. Then she looked at Jonah, standing quietly in the corner, and declared that this human was proof that courage had many forms. Her words spread through the fleet, and the tension melted into purpose. The battle began with a thunder that shook the stars. Zareth's remnants struck hard with missile storms and swarm drones that clawed at shields like metal locusts. The Bloodlight led the defense line. Jonah stood by the reactor panel, guiding power distribution with steady hands. He saw that the enemy used old Kreeth tactics designed for brute force, and told the Queen they should not fight like warriors, but like builders. She asked what that meant, and he explained that they should not meet fire with fire but redirect energy to create imbalance. He rerouted power from forward cannons to lateral thrusters, causing the Bloodlight to spin unpredictably through enemy lines. The attackers missed their shots and collided with each other, as the humans' plan turned chaos into weapon. The crew cheered while the Queen watched the impossible dance of her ship and laughed for the first time in battle. But victory came at a cost. A stray missile struck a smaller cruiser carrying cadets from the academy. The ship burned and sent distress signals before going silent. The Queen ordered rescue, but enemy drones blocked the way. Jonah looked at the readings and said the cruiser was trapped between collapsing debris fields. He offered to take a shuttle through the wreckage because human reaction time in gravity flux was faster than most species. The Queen refused, saying it was suicide. Yet he insisted that he could guide the rescue drones manually. Her eyes met his, and she saw the same determination that had saved her daughters. She allowed it and placed her crest on his vest, saying, "If he fell, his name would be remembered." Jonah piloted the shuttle through drifting wrecks using manual controls that groaned under pressure. Explosions painted the void in orange light. He reached the cruiser and locked on, opening the airlock by bypassing code systems. The cadets were barely alive. He helped them into escape pods one by one while hull alarms screamed. A final blast threw the shuttle off course, but he managed to stabilize it long enough to send the pods toward safety. The Queen's voice came over comm asking for his return, but the shuttle's engines were dead. He looked out at the stars and saw the blood light surrounded by allies holding the line. He smiled faintly and triggered the emergency beacon. Rescue came minutes later. The bloodlight's tractor beam pulled him back. The hull blackened and the cabin filled with smoke. The Queen met him at the dock. Without words, she pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the faint pulse that proved he lived. She turned to her crew and declared that this human was now bonded by honor to the royal house. Every Kreeth warrior saluted as one. It was a sight no historian would forget. Together they watched as the last enemy ships fled broken and scattered into the dark. After the battle, the station was quiet again. Many lives had been lost, but the Alliance stood stronger. The council that had doubted her now sent envoys bearing praise, though their motives were politics, not respect. Soraka ignored them and spent her time walking through the shipyards with Jonah, studying repairs. They spoke of rebuilding, of teaching, of a future where humans and Kreeth shared knowledge rather than fear. He told her that progress was born when different hearts beat together. She repeated the words softly as if testing their sound. That night, when her daughters fell asleep, they asked if Jonah would stay forever. She told them that no bond lasts forever, but that some leave echoes that never fade. She looked out at the stars and saw in their flicker the shape of a new dawn rising from the ashes of mistrust. What began as accident had become alliance, and what began as fear had become faith. The galaxy did not stay quiet for long because the victory at Station Varel had not gone unnoticed across the stars. Whispers spread through border worlds that the humans were not just allies, but miracle workers who could turn defeat into triumph with their strange ways. Among the Kreeth, there were songs already calling Jonah the warm blood, the one whose heart tamed royal airs and guided fire through storm. Yet peace breeds jealousy, and new factions formed in the shadows. Some within the council feared that the Queen's trust in a human made her weak. Others believed humanity's influence would erode their ancient traditions. Queen Soraka felt the pressure rising, but she ignored the murmurs. Her mind was fixed on a growing darkness reported from the rim sectors where energy readings vanished overnight, and colonies stopped transmitting. Scouts sent to investigate did not return. It felt like a storm building beyond sight. Jonah worked tirelessly in the shipyards, improving safety for the Kreeth fleet. He designed hybrid systems mixing human adaptability with Kreeth precision, allowing ships to repair themselves mid-flight. The Queen visited often, walking through the docks with her daughters clinging to her cloak. She would find Jonah surrounded by tools and maps, his hands moving with purpose. She asked him why he never rested, and he answered that he found peace in fixing things because broken things had stories to tell. She said then perhaps she too was broken because the war had taken too many of her people. He replied that anything still breathing could be rebuilt. His words struck her deeper than any blade. She turned away before he could see the emotion in her eyes. Weeks later, a scout ship limped back from the rim, its hull half melted, and crew barely alive. They carried news of a new enemy, not remnants of Zareth, but something older. They called it the Hollow Swarm, a fleet of machines feeding on energy itself, leaving only cold, dead systems behind. The swarm was moving toward inhabited sectors, devouring suns. Fear spread through the council faster than any fire. They demanded immediate evacuation of border worlds, but Soraka refused. She summoned her generals and Jonah to the war chamber. The projection showed hundreds of metallic tendrils stretching across space. The Queen asked for ideas. Most officers spoke of retreat, but Jonah studied the data quietly and pointed out a pattern. He said the swarm followed energy lines like insects to light, which meant they could be lured and trapped. His plan was risky, but the only one that promised survival. He suggested using the dust field where Zareth had fallen, turning it into a giant energy net that could collapse on itself when the swarm entered. The Queen listened, then gave the order to prepare. Preparations took days that felt like years. The Bloodlight led the operation, joined by ships from multiple species who had heard of the humans' brilliance. For the first time, the Council allowed mixed crews of humans and aliens to serve together. Jonah oversaw the installation of energy conduits around the field, while Soraka coordinated fleets. The hatchlings watched from the command deck, fascinated by the activity, and asked if the stars could really be saved by one human idea. The Queen told them that ideas are small flames that can light the darkest voids. She believed it, though fear gnawed at her heart. Jonah sensed her unease and told her that fear was proof of care, and that only the careless were fearless. She smiled slightly, calling him philosopher instead of engineer. He said that on Earth both jobs were often the same. When the swarm arrived, it looked like a river of darkness stretching across light years. Every ship in the Allied fleet trembled before its sight. The Bloodlight held position at the center of the trap, waiting for the swarm to enter. Jonah stood at the control core, monitoring the power flow that would ignite the net. The tension was so heavy that even machines seemed to hold their breath. The swarm poured into the field, drawn by the bait energy that pulsed like a living star. The moment it reached the center, Jonah triggered the sequence. Energy flared across the dust field, weaving into chains of lightning that wrapped around the mechanical tide. For a moment it seemed the plan had worked, but then the swarm began to adapt, consuming the energy instead of being destroyed. Systems across the fleet started shutting down. The trap was turning into a feast for the enemy. Panic rippled through the bridge as lights flickered. The Queen turned to Jonah, asking what could be done. He said that the swarm fed on directed current, so they must give it chaos instead of order. He disconnected safety protocols and began overloading reactors with erratic pulses. The Queen's crew protested, saying it would tear the ships apart, but Jonah insisted it was the only way. The Queen trusted him once more and gave the command to follow his lead. Power surged wildly through the network, turning the neat energy lines into storms of random bursts. The swarm shuddered as its rhythm broke. The creatures within it began colliding and imploding, unable to feed on disorder. The entire field erupted in blinding light as magnetic storms consumed the enemy. The fleet barely held together. The Bloodlight's shields failed and the hull screamed under strain. Jonah stayed at the core, stabilizing output by hand while the Queen tried to pull him away. He refused, saying he had to finish what he started. The explosion that followed could be seen from distant worlds. When the light faded, the swarm was gone, disintegrated into drifting fragments. The fleet floated in silence, surrounded by debris and static. Many systems were offline. The Queen looked around and called for Jonah, but he was gone from the core. Panic stabbed her chest until she heard his voice faint through comms, saying he was alive but trapped under collapsed panels. She rushed with her guards and found him pinned but breathing. Together they lifted the debris and pulled him free. His hands were burned, his face pale, but he smiled weakly, saying it worked. She knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his chest, feeling that steady rhythm that had once soothed her daughters. For a moment the war and the stars faded, and there was only the sound of that human heartbeat echoing through the ruined ship. When they returned to the station, the galaxy was already calling it the Battle of the Hollow Sky. The Allied world sent messages of awe and gratitude. The Council that had once feared humans now sent envoys begging for their guidance. The Queen stood before the assembled captains and declared that the human heart had saved them again. Jonah tried to dismiss the praise, but she silenced him with a look of respect deeper than any medal. She told him that what he called chaos, the galaxy now called hope. Her words echoed through every broadcast, and for the first time the universe saw humanity not as newcomers but as protectors of light. That night, as the Bloodlight drifted in calm orbit, Soraka watched her daughters asleep near Jonah once more, and whispered that destiny was strange, for she had sought warriors, but found salvation in an engineer who carried peace, where others carried war. The months after the Battle of the Hollow Sky changed everything for the galaxy, because the victory had not only destroyed the swarm, but had also destroyed the fear that divided the species for centuries. The name Jonah Reed became a signal of trust whispered in ports and council halls alike. Humans who had once been treated with suspicion were now invited as partners in research and exploration. Yet for Jonah and Queen Soraka, the glory meant little compared to the silence that followed battle. The Bloodlight had been half-wrecked by the energy surge, and he spent every waking hour helping the engineers rebuild it. Soraka often joined him not as ruler but as friend, sometimes handing him tools in silence as they worked side by side beneath the glowing hull plates. There was a peace between them that words could not hold, a connection born of shared danger and mutual respect. One evening while they worked, the younger Princess Sari climbed down the ladder to the deck, holding a small recording sphere. She pressed it between her claws, and it projected an image of the battle recreated from logs, showing the field of lightning collapsing upon the swarm. The child looked at the image of Jonah standing amid chaos and asked if he had been afraid. Jonah smiled and said that everyone feels fear, even heroes, but courage is simply acting despite it. The queen watched him with quiet pride, realizing that his influence was shaping her daughters more than any tutor ever could. The Kreeth had always taught their young that strength was dominance and control. Yet here a human taught that strength could also mean care and patience. She began to see that survival of a people was not measured by victories, but by what they learned from those they met. Peace, however, did not come without price, because rebuilding the alliance demanded endless negotiation. The council wanted to claim the hollow sky weapon technology for themselves, but the queen refused. She said that knowledge born of unity must remain shared, not owned. Jonah supported her, saying that the device was too dangerous to repeat, that its power should remain a lesson, not a tool. Many delegates accused her of letting humans influence policy. Some even tried to start rebellion within her empire, but the memory of the swarm's destruction silenced most opposition. The Kreeth soldiers who had fought beside humans now swore loyalty to both flags. For the first time, the galaxy began to resemble a family instead of a battlefield. As the months turned to a full cycle, the council prepared a grand ceremony to honor those who had saved the stars. It would be held on Station Varel, where it had all begun. The queen wanted Jonah to attend as her equal, but he refused at first, saying he was no diplomat. She told him that sometimes the greatest symbols of peace are not born of speeches, but of presence. He could not argue with that, and so he agreed, though he asked to bring the engineers who had worked beside him. When the day came, the station glittered with banners from 100 worlds. The queen arrived in ceremonial armor that gleamed like red fire, and Jonah walked beside her in a plain gray uniform. The crowd erupted in cheers, not only for royalty, but for the man who had once been accused of kidnapping her children. During the ceremony, the council speaker read the proclamation, declaring the creation of the Interworld Accord. The new charter recognized humans as equal members of the Galactic Alliance. Soraka stepped forward and addressed the assembly, saying that strength had saved no one. That understanding had. She turned to Jonah and spoke his name before all, calling him Shield of the Hatchlings, Guardian of the Hollow Sky, and Brother of the Crown. Then she took the royal crest from her neck and placed it in his hands. The hall went silent because no Kreeth queen had ever shared her symbol of lineage with another species. Jonah bowed deeply and said that on Earth, when two people shared a bond of life, they planted a tree to mark its roots. The queen smiled, saying then they would plant one together. After the ceremony, Jonah prepared to return to Earth because he believed his part in the story was done. He told the queen that humanity would now take its place among the stars and that she should guide the alliance without him. The hatchlings cried at the news, clinging to his arms and refusing to let go. Soraka stood quietly, her scales dimmed by sadness, but she understood. She gave him a shard of crystal from the Bloodlight's core, saying it would always hum with the same rhythm as the ship's heart. Jonah promised to visit again, and to send seeds from Earth's forests so they could grow in alien soil. When he left the station, the queen stood at the viewport watching his transport vanish into the light of the sun, and felt something inside her twist like a pulled string. It was loss, but also pride. Years passed. The tree Jonah spoke of grew in the royal garden under the open sky of Kreeth Prime. Its leaves shimmered in twin colors, green from earth and blue from the native soil. Beneath it, the young princesses played and sometimes pressed their ears against its trunk, saying they could hear a heartbeat faint but steady. The queen aged yet ruled with calm wisdom, guided by the lessons of a human who once fixed machines with his hands and changed an empire with his warmth. She made the alliance strong by building schools where species studied together and ships where mixed crews sailed without fear. In every hall of the capital, the crest of the joined heartbeats was displayed as symbol of the new era. One morning when the sun rose over the silver spires, a message arrived from the far side of the galaxy. It was from Earth, reporting that Jonah, Reed had passed away peacefully at sea while repairing an old beacon tower. The news struck the queen with both grief and gratitude. She went alone to the tree and placed her crown at its roots. She whispered that his story would live as long as her bloodline did, and that his name would be spoken whenever courage was needed. That night, under a sky filled with stars that no longer felt distant, she watched as her daughters lit lanterns that floated upward carrying human and Kreeth symbols together. The glow spread across the horizon like a new constellation. In the years that followed, the legend of the human engineer and the alien queen became part of the galaxy's shared heritage. Children across worlds learned the story not as history, but as truth of the heart. That peace begins with one act of kindness, and that even in a universe of steel and fire, the soft rhythm of compassion can change destiny. In the final record of Queen Soraka's reign, historians wrote that she was the first ruler to turn war into unity, and that at her side had once stood a human whose heart had beaten strong enough for two worlds. And so the story ended where it had begun, with a heartbeat that crossed the stars and two young hatchlings once lost now grown wise, remembering the warmth of the human chest where they first slept safe, while the galaxy beyond learned what it truly meant to be alive.